So my name is bettridge-wiese. I'm a software consultant based in Champaign. I work for a company called Two-Way, which is basically web consultancy, though we do all kinds of tech. We're consultants, so we will do basically anything that people pay us for. So I actually came to software pretty late in my career. I've worked in the arts, I've worked in human resources, I've worked in academic publishing. I've only been in software for about 4 years. And so one of the things that I like is that gives me kind of a better idea than many super technical people about how complicated it actually is, and frankly how scary it can be to build something. So if you haven't worked with technology before, I know it's really daunting to launch a project. Like, what should you build? Who should build it for you? What is a reasonable price? And these are really great questions, and they don't have exact answers. But what I'm hoping is that I'm going to give you in this sort of hour the skills to ask those questions and sort of evaluate what answers you find. So before we get started, I do have one thing to say, and if you remember nothing else from this session, I hope you remember this. When you're talking about technical projects, it is totally fine not to know things, as long as you're trying to learn them. As a technical partner, I'm never going to judge you for not knowing things, right? Like, I want you to be as informed as you can be. So if you don't know something, I want you to ask about it. And I'm not going to judge you, just like I hope you don't judge me for not being able to identify any crop that isn't corn. Sorry. So here's the plan for today. We're going to go over 6 things. The first is just understanding the development process. The second is how you decide to build things. The third is how you pick somebody to build something with. The fourth is how to be involved in the process as it's ongoing. The fifth is how you support your product after it's released. And for the last one, I'm going to go through and just give some sort of common development pitfalls, a few things that I see that bite a lot of projects in the butt. As we go through, over here on the right, I hit the wrong button. What happened? I had an expert. There we go. Sorry. Over here on the right, you're going to see some definitions for technical terms. I started out with having a glossary, but it got to be about 6 slides long, so as relevant stuff comes up, it'll pop in over on the right. I'm going to have plenty of time for questions at the end, so if you have anything you want to know, feel free to let me know. I also have curbside consulting hours for a couple hours left today, so I would love to talk to you then. And I do have one more thing to say about software and technical projects in general, which is that this thing comes up a lot where somebody will say, can you do this? And the answer is yes. Because in software, anything is possible as long as you have money for it, right? Like, we can build anything for you. Anybody you find can make something happen. But our hourly rate is $100 an hour, and that is extremely reasonable by software developer rates. That said, I will never pretend that $100 an hour is cheap, right? I know that that's expensive. So what generally tends to happen with a technical project is that there's a collection of compromises between what you really want and what you can afford. And sort of not having a sense of that is what leads to a lot of really giant, never-ending software boondoggles where you're like, oh, well, it's going to be even more money to build the thing I actually want. So just keep in mind that whatever you want, you can have, but it's really good to really have an idea of what it's going to cost. And I'm going to bring it up over and over again today, that having an idea of your budgets is one of the most important things you can do. So I like to break the development process down into 6 phases: concept, planning, execution, refinement, release, and support. I'm going to go through each of these phases to give you an idea what they're like. This is when the technical jargon starts coming pretty fast. So we start with a concept, which is really just an idea of what you want to build. It might be software, which is, say, just runs on a computer. It might be hardware, we're talking about a physical device. Or very frequently, you might be building some combination of those things, like a piece of hardware that talks to a piece of software. Regardless of what you're building, at this point, you just need to have an idea. And from that concept, that's when you move into planning the product. So yeah, I was not kidding about terms here. So the planning phase feels really slow. Basically, you're going to take a lot of time to have meetings with people to really get things hashed out before you start to see any action. In these meetings, you're going to meet with your technical partner. Usually it's going to have any of your key stakeholders, and then it's going to have probably their project manager and anyone that they think is relevant for planning. Generally that's going to include the user experience designer, and it can include other people as well. In this planning, you're going to create what's called user stories. And these user stories are things that describe specific actions and paths through your application. The user experience designer listens to these user stories and uses them to create what are called wireframes, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a wireframe of the application that comes to you. And once you've reviewed those and you see that all these actions are correct, then it gets passed on to the developers for the actual execution. So the planning phase, I said, felt slow, and you didn't see much action. The development and the execution is kind of the opposite, which is a lot is going on, but you're not going to see it for a while, right? So it gets pretty quiet. Basically, you'll have contact with your project manager. You'll also probably meet your graphic designer. And your graphic designer is going to be the person who creates mock-ups of what the application actually looks like. So compared to the wireframes, which are really just sketches, those get handed to the graphic designer, unless the graphic designer is the same person as the user experience designer, which can happen. And the graphic designer is going to work with you again to make sure that it looks right. And while that's happening, the developers or engineers, these are interchangeable concepts, depending on who you're talking to, they're going to be building the application. And you'll hear these two terms get bandied about a lot, front end and back end. Back end is basically the plumbing of whatever you're building, and the front end is what people see. I know for a fact that this remote hates me. I was in here yesterday and never went for it. So the refinement phase actually overlaps with execution. Because your project managers should be getting your feedback as much as possible. And if they aren't, honestly, you should be bugging them. The more chances you get to see things early, the less likely you are to end up needing major changes later, which are super expensive. But one thing to be very careful about here is scope creep. Make sure that when you are looking at the application and reviewing features, that you're not identifying things and saying, oh, that could be better, and then asking for changes, right? Those won't have been included in your budgets or your timeframes, and they're gonna wreak havoc on both. So, as you've been refining, we come along to release. So, if you've made a commercial product, this is probably when you need to have a publicity plan, which is you make sure people hear about it. Now, something to be said about release is that barring a miracle, it's gonna be really rocky. Like, stuff is gonna go wrong all the time. You will have tested as much as you can, your partner will have tested as much as you can, but there is really nothing like a horde of people who have no preconceptions about your tool bashing on it to just find stuff that'll blow your mind. So, a lot of stuff that people will find is going to be, but they'll be legitimate issues that you need to fix. But it is also important to remember that people can be really unhappy and are really good at it, and not all feedback is going to be valid. We'll talk about what to do with feedback later on. So, release is a major step in the process, but it is not the end. Because after release, you have to still support your product. You will spend time and money, as long as this thing is in the wild, making sure that you keep the content fresh and that the tool is working and secure. If you don't, you will pay a major price later for this. So ideally, you'll also start thinking about the next steps that you want to take. So either if you want to keep improving this tool, or if you want to make something new. Now, all of that said, before you can finish, you have to get started. And I'm going to talk about first how you decide to build something. So, except in very rare situations, you are not going to have somebody come up to you with a giant sign that says, you need more software, right? So, my goal here is to give you an idea of a general sense of what technology can do so that you can recognize in your own work where it might be able to help you. So, I'm going to list here a few reasons that you might decide to find a technical partner. This first one is really the most important. If you have a human being doing something boring and repetitive, a computer can do it faster and better. And that way, you have a human being who can do something that actually requires creativity and thought, right? Data entry, that sort of thing. Repetitive tasks, these are really great. But it is also sometimes just as simple as having figured out that you can get money out of people if you have a new tool. Or maybe you built something a while ago and it broke. This is very common, especially in sort of teams who get like grant funding, so you build a piece of software, it's really good for a while, 5 or 6 years pass, web browser standards change, and your application doesn't work anymore, right? Or something you built ran out of money before and you'd like to finish it. And then finally, and this is like not a great thing, but it's true, right? If you don't spend all your grant money, unfortunately, sometimes you don't get it the next year. And the nice thing about a technical project is that it can take any shape you want. So it will fit in your grant. I don't like this, but it's true and it's something to keep in mind. So that's sort of why you might build something, but it's also good to talk about what you can build. So I think you're mostly going to fit into one of three categories. Basically, you're going to see a lot of websites, right? And I'm talking a website, not user interaction, not an application, just people go to your website, learn about your organization, or learn about your mission, or some important thing like that. Or maybe you're making a commercial tool, like a software as a service. You're probably familiar with these like QuickBooks Online, etc. This is software as a service is the business model now for web applications. It is making money hand over fist for a lot of people, and everybody wants rent. But the other thing you might build is something internal, and this gets overlooked and underappreciated a lot. But if you can make life easier inside your company, then you can see tremendous rewards for it. Okay, general categories, specifically, Adrian, what do I build? Well, this depends a lot on the core competencies and the mission of your organization. I want you to think about what you might be able to do well and what kind of problems you can solve. And stay on mission, right? Don't try to branch out because you think you see some commercial opportunity. Make sure that it fits within your organization's competencies. So it's also a good idea to know whether you're going to build something for web browsers or that runs on native operating systems, iOS, Android, Windows, Mac, etc. I bring this up because my professional advice is to build for the web. Anything you build for the web is going to run on any device that has a web browser. But if you build something for a native operating system, you have to build it again for every native operating system you want to support. There are going to be some interchangeable parts, so it's not actually 4 times the expense, but it's pretty close. Finally, and this is really, really important, you need to have an idea of what you're going to spend on the product. Okay, so you've got a general concept in hand, and I want to say again, it is still a general concept. And how do you actually pick somebody to work with? Well, there is not a magic recipe, but I'm going to offer some suggestions. I also need to offer a disclaimer. I am obviously very biased in the things that I'm about to say, right? This is my work. My company does things in a specific way, so I think that you want to hire people that do things the right way, or we would do them differently, right? But I do want to acknowledge that I am biased when I say these things. So, to start with, I want to give you a good idea of the sort of partners you can hire. You're essentially going to be selecting between an individual or like a group of individuals. You might hire 2 or 3 freelancers who do different things, or you're going to hire an actual firm, a consultancy, an agency, a lot of names for the same thing. So there's not a right answer here. If you're building something small and you hire one person, you know exactly who you're working with, you know exactly how to get a hold of them, you get one-on-one contact, lots of personal attention. On the other hand, working with an agency means that you have a team that you're working with. So you're going to get a wider range of skills. You'll also probably end up with a project manager and a business manager, people who can sort of smooth over the kind of issues that when you're on one-on-one, you're like, okay, I need you to fix this thing, and also can you send me that invoice again, and it gets really complicated, right? So in the end, the decision does just come down to you and your budget and your project, and it's going to be different every time. So there is another axis for your decision here, which is whether or not to go overseas. And this is a thing where I have to admit again, I'm biased. I really don't think you should. You will get a cheaper hourly rate from an overseas developer, but managing a relationship with a firm in another country, especially on the other side of the world where they're cheapest, is a huge headache and actually has a lot of hidden costs. So in my previous life, I managed a team in India, and let me tell you that having meetings at holy crap o'clock in the morning and never being able to get hold of them when there was an emergency was a real toll, right? So like when things were broken for 12 hours. So it's like super important to think about. But again, I'm biased, right? And so if you find an overseas team that's going to do the thing that you need for you, you should definitely go with them. Okay, now how do you actually find somebody to work with? So this is like the one thing that Google sucks at. If you search for a software developer, you get job postings from people who want to post job postings, software contractor, etc. It is just a flood of jobs. Very rarely will you find, say, two-way. Your best bet is word of mouth. I guarantee you that you know people who have made software projects. Either you can get a recommendation from them, which is amazing because finding a good, reliable technical partner is great, or you can get a warning of people to stay away from, which is also worth its weight in gold. A bad technical partner can really drag your project down. You can also look into other organizations and see what tools they've built if you like them, right? If you have a friend or a partner organization that has a really great app, find out who built it. If you just happen to be on the web, right, and see like, wow, I love this website, drop down to the footer and see if it has a made by some firm. Any site that we make has a site by two-way thing on it. You'll see that a lot. Finally, if you are looking for an individual, this is the thing where I can say, yes, one place to look. Upwork is great. Upwork is a merger of what were basically the two previous largest technical hiring sites for individuals. You can find people to do literally anything on Upwork. We've used Upwork at my company when we needed specific technical help before. So once you found candidates, you do have to pick one to work with. And that process is pretty interesting. So you're going to have at least one meeting, which is realistically more like 5 or 6 meetings before you even get to a proposal, right? So you're going to have lots of calls and emails where they're just trying to flesh out an idea of what you are like, and what sort of business you want to make, and how they can work with you. And after all of that, then you get a proposal / estimate, right? And that proposal is going to tell you how much you think it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. And probably both of those things are going to be more than you wanted to hear. And even this process, the proposal process, takes longer than you want it to. Because you have to filter through a lot of people. And likewise, they're filtering through you because you're not going to be a great fit for all consultancies. And a good consultant is going to tell you that. But really, I want this process to take as long as it has to. Because what you need to find is a partner you're comfortable having a really good long-term relationship with. Because if you don't have a long-term relationship, you end up in that situation you mentioned earlier where you have software that needs to be rescued later. So picking a partner is not easy. Wherever possible, please talk to more than one person, right? It's really nice when somebody comes to us and says, you're the only person we're talking to, can you build this for us? Yeah, right? But I'm not gonna be able to guarantee that I'm the best fit for them, right? So when you're going out, try to find more than one person. Like I said, it's not easy, but it's worth the payoff. So when you do talk to people, try to explain what you're doing without imposing a specific technical solution, right? What really great thing that can happen from all of this is that you can get suggestions for approaches or technologies that you have never thought of, right? This is your contractor, your potential partners, like whole game is coming up with really clever ways to do stuff. So let them do that. And finally, when you're talking to them, be honest about money. And I know, I get how nervous it can make you to talk about money, right? I totally understand the worry that you're going to tell your developer figure and they're going to soak you for every cent they can get. And I will not pretend that that never happens. But it is honestly really rare. Slightly more often if you are negotiating what's called a fixed price contract, which is this thing is $10,000, build it for me, right? Then they are going to charge you $10,000 regardless of the amount of work they did, and they'll try to do as little as possible. Most software projects are billed hourly. You're going to see all the hours that people are billed, and you'll have a very good sense for people lumping in if they are. But what happens a lot more than your budget getting soaked is that somebody goes through an entire proposal process and pitches you a dollar amount that is just way out of line with what you were expecting. And that essentially renders all that work that you've just done, it's meaningless, it's gone, right? Your potential partner, if they are still interested in your much lower figure, can rework the proposal. But they might not, right? So one of the things is there are firms who won't do small dollar jobs. It's just not worth it for them. Likewise, there are firms that can't take on a really big project, right? And so being honest about how much money you want to spend is really important. Question?
Could you set the frame of what it means small dollar jobs? Like, what does that mean?
Like 4 figures, which would be, so at $100 an hour, that's like a week of work, right? It would be a small dollar job. Like I said, you can spend any amount of money on something, right? So that figure is like making a small static website that is built out of normal components and has some design time in it, versus projects that go into the hundreds of thousands or even 7 figures. There are firms that specialize only in certain ranges of dollars. So having this information out there helps them select you just like it helps you select them. I will also tell you that it is a very upsetting experience for you to find out that the thing that you want after having done all this work just can't happen in your budget, right? Whereas I can pretty much give you a ballpark of how much your project is going to cost after talking about 10 or 15 minutes, right? I can say like, okay, we've done a lot of projects. I hear this sort of fits between this thing that we did and this thing that we did. And I can tell you like, it's going to be between $30,000 and $70,000, right? Which is much better than you finding out at the end a much more solid number. So when you are talking to potential partners, there are just infinite questions that you can ask. I'm going to offer some, obviously not an exhaustive list. None of these questions have specific right answers. These questions are aimed at assessing whether or not someone is a good technical partner for your project, right? So they're aimed at assessing their competency, their background, and their fit with you. So we're going to start with some questions about the business. This first one is really, really important, and it's going to reveal a lot about your potential partner. The software world is powered by what is called open source technology. It is an amazing communistic effort where people upload complicated software that took them months to make and let you use it for free. And that is how we build things. It's open source software stacked on top of open source software stacked on top of open source software, etc. Turtles all the way down. And what happens is that new and inexperienced people think they need to build everything from scratch. And if you start to hear it, people say, oh, well, I don't think there's really any open source technology that's applicable to your project, just run. Like that person they might be technically good, but they will not be good from a project sense. Here we go. So just like in any field, developers do have specialties, right? So it's good to know if whoever you're talking to is going to be a good fit that way if they've done similar work. Somebody who's worked in the agriculture sector is probably better for all of you than backend, unless you need to build financial software, for example. This is another question that assesses how experienced your developer is. If you ask them what challenges they see, and they say none, then they have not done enough projects, or perhaps any. Any technical project is basically just like a long line of rakes in the road waiting to be stepped on. And so you should be able to hear from your potential partner the things that they could see going wrong, right? Obvious ones are timelines and budgets, but things about the environment, the technical environment, their team, etc. All of that should be able to become to them really quickly. Now, I also want to know about how a team works on projects. These two questions are really important because they're going to assess how much your partner understands, how well your partner understands the importance of client and project management. If they tell you that you can just email whoever you want, and we track tasks in an Excel spreadsheet that we keep in the office, those are people that aren't ready to do a project at pretty much any scale. Knowing how many people work on your project gives you another interesting piece of information. In your case, I suspect the vast majority of you are going to have a software project that requires single-digit numbers of people. If you hear from their team that they suspect they'll have 20 or 30 people working on your project, they're not going to be a good fit for you. Even if they realize their project is a smaller scale and give you a smaller team, they're still not going to be considering you to be like their prime level of client, right? They're going to be slumming it with you because they couldn't pick up work for their bigger team, which means they're never going to be particularly focused on you. You want a team that's the right size to make you important. Okay, have any of you built a software product before? Cool. All right, so software quality assurance is really tough. I have this personal philosophy that computers hate us and want us to be miserable. Things go wrong all the time, especially in small teams, especially for small organizations. You will test as much as you can and things will still be broken. But you want to hear that your developer has automated testing tools and does manual review of the issues, right? They'll do that before things go to you, which saves you a lot of time of just being like, hey, this just doesn't work, right? Flat doesn't work. Or like, you deploy this change overnight, now I can't check anything, right? Now we're going to talk about technology. And I'm going to give a quick speech here about accessibility. Whenever it comes on the screen. Okay, so accessibility in a technology standpoint refers to a set of technologies that allow people with disabilities to use screens who couldn't normally. Those are either operational disabilities or most commonly visual impairments. And usually we're talking about screen readers. If you are receiving federal or state funds, accessibility will almost certainly be required in your project. If you aren't, pay for it anyway. It's the right thing to do. That's just it. People with disabilities deserve the same access to the web as anyone else, because that is where the world happens now. If you need me to make an economic case, I can tell you that websites are increasingly being viewed as public accommodations and therefore subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which has tremendous penalties for violating it. But I frankly do not think that you need an economic case for this, because like I said, people with disabilities deserve the same access as everyone else. Okay, thanks. I also want to know how people protect data, because I really don't want you to be the subject of a newspaper story about a data breach. We have all seen them, we have all seen what they do to organizations, right? You want to hear that they are keeping data encrypted, that they're using encryption for all of their project management. You want to hear preferably that they're using two-factor authentication. So speaking of client and customer data and money, never, ever, 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 ever process your own credit cards. There are a bunch of services that process credit cards. That's their whole business, which means that they have bottomless liability insurance and entire teams of people dedicated to protecting them from exactly the kind of person that would love for you to process your own credit cards. So find them, use them. I recommend Stripe. They're the easiest that we've found for developers to work with. You also want to know where your project is going to be hosted. This is a bit of a check for experience as well. The industry standard now for all basically server type hardware is to use one of the major cloud services providers. We're talking about Google, Amazon, or Microsoft. Under no circumstances should you be working with somebody who maintains their own physical servers and keeps your data on them. Not particularly for any security reasons, but just that is tremendously expensive. The amount of overhead that goes into maintaining those is huge and really should be offloaded to Amazon. And finally, understand what happens after release, because there will be issues. There might be issues pretty far down the road even, things that crop up. Understand if you're going to be paying to fix those, or if there's some sort of warranty. If there's a warranty, how long does it last? Is it 30 days, 60 days, a year? And understand exactly what's covered under that. Okay, so one of the things you need to understand as you're picking a technical partner is how important design is going to be to your project. Design is going to affect your user's judgment in ways that are probably going to surprise you. The number one predictor of how fast someone thinks a website is how much they like the design of the site. And the number one predictor of how long someone stays on your site is how fast they think it is. So you need to pay for the designer. Find out who your potential partners use for design and meet that person. Ask to see specific samples of their work that apply to your project, because again, not all designers are going to be good for all fields. And this should be standard by now, but make sure that they have experience working across all device sizes. Over 50% of traffic now on the web is mobile. And designers need to be able to design for all device sizes, which is what we call responsive design. So that's a lot of stuff to ask about. I do want to suggest some things to just generally keep an eye out for when you're selecting a partner. First of all, if you don't have a good feeling about them for any reason, just walk away. Like, you want to have a partner that you have a comfortable long-term relationship with. And if you have a gut feeling that's going to make you harbor suspicions about them, don't work with them. My general philosophy is that your partner should treat you as a highly competent individual in a different field, right? So if they're being condescending or trying to overawe you, just get rid of them. If they are being cagey about costs or timelines, it's a sign of a couple things. One, they're clueless. Two, they don't want to tell you the answer because they want it to take as long as they can to bill you as much. Either case, that's not very, that's pretty scary. And be careful of overly optimistic timelines. Many developers will say, oh yeah, no problem, 6 weeks. And 18 weeks down the line, you're still surprised, right? You want to hear from people who say like, well, it's going to take a while and it might take really long. And likewise, if somebody's asking for a really complicated technical approach, feel free to ask them for something less expensive or less complex. It is certainly the case that some, really geeky people will see a product and be like, hey, we can do this cool thing that we've been wanting to do, but that's service to them, not service to you. So make sure to ask about this if you see it. Okay, and finally, I'm going to talk about two things that you hear about on the news all the time: blockchain and artificial intelligence. First of all, blockchain. I'm just going to say this: blockchain is nonsense. No one has found a compelling use case for blockchain despite tens of millions of dollars of investment. What they have found is a way to make a very expensive shared Excel spreadsheet that combined uses 1.5% of the world's electricity. Blockchain is an ecological disaster. If anyone is trying to sell you on blockchain, they are bullshitting you. Artificial intelligence is really cool, really amazing stuff. Also, generally requires a PhD in computer science. If somebody is trying to sell you on computer science, again, a couple of options, artificial intelligence. Either they don't really know what they're doing and they just want to mess around, or like they're actually bringing real PhD computer scientists to your project, which is unlikely to be necessary. So ideally, you're going to have a couple of proposals to review, but even if you only have one, read it very carefully. Ask as many questions as you need to understand things, even if you are asking questions about things that are technical. If you are wondering, if you're like, don't understand technical things, and you say, well, I'm not a technical person, so I don't need to get it. They should be able to explain it to you in a way that you get. That's really important. If they can't, you're looking at people who can't communicate like really important key things in a project that could be costing you, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. When you're reading over these proposals, see what they have in common and see what's different. If you like something in one approach but would generally otherwise hire the other developer, just ask that other developer if they're willing to do it. They really are happy to, right? Like, if you want me to change a proposal, absolutely, 100%. Might change the budget, the timeline, but it's entirely up to you if you want it. Oh, I already said, don't be afraid to ask for changes. Okay, so as I said, development can be expensive, right? And there is a pretty wide range. I said, two-wave is cheap at $100 an hour. I think that really, you do get what you pay for. The more dollars you put into a developer, the better they're going to be. There are some geographic things. For example, I really recommend hiring developers in the middle of the cornfields rather than on the coasts. But you don't really generally need the best person that you can get with your dollars. So one of the people that we work with at Two-Wave when we have a complex project is an actual rocket scientist. So you can imagine that we only hire him when we have rocket science level problems. Otherwise, he gets to keep doing his thing at a very exorbitant rate, right? So only hire rocket scientists if you're building a rocket. That said, there is a kind of expert to keep your eye open for, who has a very high hourly rate, but is so good that they can ship your project really fast. One really common example of this is WordPress developers. I'm sure you've all heard of WordPress, or at least many of you. So there are people who make their entire living making WordPress sites. And those people charge far more per hour than I do at Two-Wave to make a WordPress site. And I think that they are probably faster at it. If you need to make a basic WordPress site, you find somebody who's a WordPress expert and they'll have it done really fast. So another thing I want you to think about is the corporate culture of your potential partner. Because you want somebody who operates similar to you. You're going to be working very closely with them, and probably for a long time. So you want to make sure that your cultures mesh. And there are all kinds of cultures. For example, at Two-Wave, we are geographically diverse. So all meetings with us are by video call. And we have an extremely generous interpretation of business hours, given that we're spread in every time zone in the US. So if you're most comfortable working with a team who wears suits and sits in cubicles from 9 to 5, Two-Wave wouldn't be the right fit for you, nor would we want you to pick us. Because again, you need to be comfortable long term. You need to have trust for these people, and you need to feel like you can still be working with them in 2 or 3 years. And this final under-recognized aspect of selecting a partner is the thing that bites a lot of people in the butt, and is the actual legal agreement. They can vary pretty widely, so you can just have handshake deals, or you can have long, thick, complex contracts. Of the two of those, your gut instinct is going to be that the first one is what you want, and I assure you actually want the second one. It is going to be a matter of personal comfort that your lawyer should have a lot of input on, and if you do not have a lawyer, you need one. Your lawyer is going to save your butt so many times working with people, just looking over contracts and finding things that are wrong. It's especially good if you can find a lawyer who has experience in technology, because there are a lot of booby traps. One of those is intellectual property. At the end of the project, you absolutely must own the intellectual property of your project. By default, if the contract doesn't say anything, most legal interpretations currently will have you as the owner of intellectual property. But some contracts specify that the development is made and that the developer is going to retain the intellectual property. If that's the case, just go. right? That is extremely underhanded. I will say that it is pretty common for a contract to state that during development, the intellectual property is copyright of the developer until you make your final payment. This assures that developers get paid and will not be a problem, assuming that you are going to pay your developer. Speaking of which, please do understand what that means. You're all laughing, but you would not believe how many people like, wait, I have to pay every 2 weeks? Yes, right? So know if you've got a bi-weekly invoice cycle, or if it's one lump sum at the beginning and one lump sum at the end. Decide what you're comfortable with and go from there. I do think, in general, you should be looking to have a developer bill hourly over a flat sum. I think the incentives for a flat sum project are to get it done as fast as possible, and an hourly project tends to have a lot more polish on it. That said, your hourly project can go over budget. Finally, here, do know what happens if something goes wrong, if there's an actual dispute between the two of you. So a two-way contract calls for mandatory arbitration, which is very common. If a contract doesn't say what happens, you're going to be settling disputes in the courts, which has its pluses and minuses, but it's a thing I want you to be aware of, despite the fact that I hope for you that nothing is ever relevant about it. So you have picked a partner, and now what? You must be a vital part of the development process. Here are some things I want you to know about development, and you'll probably notice that only one is actually about software, right? Bugs are inevitable. Oh boy, you will see lots of bugs. The rest of it is about money, right? Money is super important. As I've said, you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to pay for it. But conversely, the point at which you stop paying for a software project is when it's done. And I will tell you that the vast majority of projects that I have seen at 2Wave and at our partner organizations have been done when it's stopped being paid for, not when every box has been checked on the task order, right? So this is why it's so important to make your budgets clear, to stick to them, and never allow the project to grow in scope. That's how you finish a project. Now, once your project is up and running, you need to be a constant, active participant in its management. This means that you need to understand the structure of the project. You need to know how development is going to work and when you're going to see things from your developer. You also need to know who you should be talking to. So in general, assuming you're working with a firm, not an individual, you won't talk directly to developers. Their time is focused, and they're going to get information from the project manager, and that's who you're going to talk to. You'll talk to the project manager. They'll translate what you have to say into something that's actionable for the developer and pass it on. This also runs both ways. Make sure that your partner knows who to talk to at your organization. Preferably knows the one person to talk to at your organization who does the same thing that the project manager does. Take the questions from the developer, pass them on to relevant parties, and pass them back. This should also be the one person who is allowed to authorize expenditures for the project. If you have more than one person who can authorize spending on a project, you have more than one person who can screw up budgets. So make sure that there's just one person who can authorize it. Now, working with a designer is a pretty different experience because at heart, they are artists. The designer is going to come to you to help develop a vision for what your product looks like. You need to be able to trust them, right? Because they have in their hands your personal brand. If you find you don't trust them, this is again a situation where you get a different designer. Through a conversation, the designer is going to try to get an idea of what works for you and your brand and your project, which means it's really good if you have examples of things you like. They can be really disparate. They can be websites, they can be public art, just an idea of the sort of vision that you have. Once your designer has a good sense for you, they start preparing candidate designs, and they'll show them to you. And they will not expect these to be what you want. What they will expect is really good feedback from you, and I don't like it is not feedback, right? But it's also the feedback that designers hear the most. What you need to do is identify the things you don't like. If you can't figure out why, compare it to something you do, and then point that out.
Question. When you say that they're going to be giving you things that they know you're not going to like.
Yeah.
So does that all count in the hourly rate then?
Generally.
Oh,
yeah.
Wonderful.
Right. So they're gonna do their best, right? And they're gonna build 2 or 3 things and say like, okay, I think that I'm hearing from you this, like I think this might be a good look, and they'll pass them to you knowing that no one of those is going to be exactly what you want, right? They'll probably be close, and so you generally get another round. Some developers charge a flat, or developers. Some designers just charge a flat design fee. Some bill hourly. It really is up to them, and depends on how they're working through your partner. I do want you to keep an open mind. When you tell designers you don't like certain things, designers love to push the envelope, and that they can come up with some really great radical things that can make you really stand out. So do try to trust them. I thought I took this bullet off, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So use color intentionally. Right now, everybody likes blue websites. I mean, it's a plague, right? And I love the color blue, but your site is not going to stand out if you want a blue website, right? Your designer is going to have a color palette for you that represents your brand. And again, it's the thing where you trust them, right? And you can work with them and say like, I feel like these colors don't quite do it, but do use color intentionally, not just because it's the cool thing right now. Okay, so that's collaborating with the designer, but you also need to work hand in hand with your developer. And so in the question section, I mentioned knowing what tools they use, right? But regardless of the actual tool, I need you to know how it works. So you'll get some email from your potential partner that invites you to some project management software, Basecamp, Trello, etc. You'll get logged in. If you're not comfortable and your partner hasn't offered you a tour of exactly how everything works, ask for one, right? Again, it's okay to ask questions, right? You need to know everything that's going on. If at some point you begin to not feel comfortable with the tool again, ask for another tour. Always be comfortable using a refresher, getting a refresher. And the reason that I want you to be so comfortable with the tools is that email sucks, and you should never be emailing. All your communications should be within your project management tool. Email boxes get clogged, emails get lost. Email is not a to-do list, right? Even if you email your partner about something, it's probably going to end up in your project management tool. So don't put that work on them. And speaking of not putting work on people, please do your part to have really good meetings. Like we've all had this sort of internal meeting where nothing gets solved, right? So like the most important thing is to know what the goal of the meeting is and stay on target. So one of my favorite podcasts has a technique that they call the can of worms. Whenever something tangential but important to talk about comes up, they call it a can of worms, they put it on a list, they discuss it later, but not in that podcast in that case, or not in this meeting, right? Also, know when a discussion is going to be fruitless, right? It's super easy to just go round and round and round a topic and waste a ton of time that is billed hourly by your developers. So if something is not going to be decided today, don't decide it today. And finally, and this is as much on your partners as on you, but make sure to have a good record of decisions that are made. Because boy, it feels bad to find out that something is being done that you don't remember being decided, right? And it happens. Lots of complex decisions get made. Having a record of what decisions have been made is going to be the difference between a quick resolution to like, oh yeah, we did decide this, right? And sometimes that will be the developer saying, oh, I'm sorry, right? Or a long, drawn out discussion involving changes in your contract and your billing and your budgets, right? So keep a good memos of what's happened. Now, I can give you a ton of technical and pseudo-technical skills that will be useful in software development, but the only one I'm really going to talk about is this, user stories. A user story is one persona, one potential hypothetical user's path through an application, either a single interaction or a whole experience. It states who the user is and what they want to do, right? So here, this is a really concise user story. As a farmer browsing this site, I want to be able to search for buyers of my products. Okay. User stories can also be long. They could be the description entirely from landing on your storefront to checking out or to receiving the package that they order. Regardless, being able to put yourself in the shoes of another user, not yourself, your potential users, is really useful because those are the things, like I said at the beginning, that go to the developers. And that's how the developers decide what to build. Now, referring to those is also a great way to test your application. Testing, test everything. So I'm going to say this like a bunch, but you really have to know what's going on with your project, right? It's sort of my underlying theme. Talk about money, know what's going on in your project. So given that, you need to be testing your project frequently. You should find out anytime a new feature or something you requested is released. Test it like fast, right? When you get the email that day, give feedback, let them know if it works or not, right? The faster the feedback cycle, the faster the iterative development, the better your project is going to be. But please do not only test new things. Make a habit of continuing to use your application because, as I said earlier, computers hate us and want us to be miserable, and things will break. Things will break for entirely unclear reasons, and if you find them, they get fixed, right? And your developers are also going to be working hard to make sure that everything is going, but you have a tremendous responsibility as well to be testing your tool. Okay, when you are testing, it's important to give good feedback, just like it's important to give good feedback to a designer. So it doesn't work is not useful feedback, right? It doesn't work is the beginning of a scavenger hunt for your developer, right? Because they have to say, is the page not loading? Okay, are the buttons not clickable? Is it inexplicably in another language? These are all things that have happened to us, right? Yeah, that was a browser setting. It wasn't even our application, but boy, it was fun to track down, right? Because all we heard was, it doesn't work. What does that mean, right? Be explicit about what behavior you expect and what's actually happening. Make sure that you can reproduce the problem, right? That it's not a one-off. Turn off your ad blockers and other web browser extensions to make sure that it's the tool and not the browser. Try to give as much information as you can to the developer, right? Step-by-step instructions are great, screenshots are better, video is incredible, right? Anything you can do to stop them from going on a scavenger hunt. But be wary of scope creep. It is easy to see something and think, oh, let's change this, when it's not actually broken, right? It's not misbehaving, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to, and you say now at the end of the project, well, hey, I want it to be different. Yeah, everybody wants it to be different, right? Like there's always improvements to be made. Do that in the next phase of your project. Only fix what's actually broken. This is my last know what's going on slide. Have an idea of how your budget is doing. Watch your invoices, check them against the project max. If it looks like your ceiling is coming up fast, talk to your developer. They should hopefully have talked to you, but hey, sometimes people aren't paying great attention, right? Find out if this is a problem, or maybe you're now at what we consider like the long tail of software development, where a little bit of work gets done for a long time, right? But again, know what's going on. Now, in some situations, yeah, your budget means you're either going to have to pare back features or authorize more money, right? Every budget that any developer makes is ideally going to not run out, but a lot of them do. And all of that leads up to releasing your project, which, as I said earlier, is not the end. So, first of all, I do want you to give yourself a pat on the back. Most software is never released. I'm pretty sure. Most software projects don't actually see the light of day. They go wrong, they get abandoned. So if you get something out into the world, then it's awesome. You deserve credit. Now, assuming that you want people to actually use this thing, you do need to have a publicity plan ready, right? Hire a skywriter, get Facebook ads, Google ads, anything you can do to get in front of the eyes of the people who should see it. Otherwise, you just spent a bunch of money and it's not going anywhere. If you're building an internal tool, you get to skip some of that, but you might be surprised how many internal tools get built and poorly publicized and sit in some folder somewhere where they could be making people's lives easier if they just knew about them. Once you're out in the world, you're going to get a lot of feedback. Take it all in, but don't assume that you have to change everything. Look at the feedback and discuss it with your developers, right? Figure out what's actually good usability feedback or bug reports versus people who are just being mad on the internet, which is the thing that people on the internet are best at. In addition to short-term support right after your release, your product is going to keep costing you money and going to require long-term support. First of all, if you have content on your site, make sure that it is updated periodically, because it feels really bad to go to a site, as I'm sure you've all seen the last article was from a year ago. If you're not going to be keeping your content updated, do not put dates on it, right? Dateless content just looks like, oh, great, awesome, thank you for the information. You also need to be prepared to support the continued functionality of your tool. So the best example of this is Flash, which used to basically run the interactive components of the web, and now is completely unusable on every device. So anything that was built in Flash is dead unless somebody paid to upgrade it, right? But beyond that, browser vendors are always upgrading, and while everything is supposed to be backwards compatible, I tell you, it is not. And boy, we have seen some things go very wrong, especially mobile Safari updates. You will also need maintenance for security. Existing software that's been around for 30 plus years has new security vulnerabilities found in it every week. Sometimes they are catastrophic, and you need to be able to pounce on that as fast as possible to make sure that you're not vulnerable. I do also want you to consider future development. Once you've done one of these projects, the next one is going to be a lot easier. And you can either continue to support the tool, right, build new features in, or consider where else you might want to do something. So even when I have been talking about things going wrong here, and I hope that I've given you a sense that things go wrong all the time, I've still been basically in the ideal scenario. And unfortunately, you're not always going to be there. There are a ton of things that go wrong. TUI has been making software for about 20 years, so we've seen projects go off the rails in a ton of ways. I couldn't tell you all of them, but I can just hit a few of the things that I see really screw projects up the most often. So, the number one thing that goes wrong with projects is chasing money. So, we're either talking about VC funding, or grants, or angel investors. I get it, right? Everybody wants more money. You want to keep your thing going, especially if you run out of budget, you think, oh, I can get this grant, and then I just have to do this other thing, and I can build up the other bit at the same time. And every time you get money, it has strings, and those strings pull your project off course. I have seen so many projects that never get released because every round of funding that they raise requires new things from the investors. If you're talking in the profit world, in the venture capital world, we call this the VC Ponzi scheme. What happens a lot is this. A venture capitalist finds a project, thinks they can do something with it, pumps some cash into it, takes it over, requires some changes, thinks better of it, sells it for slightly more money than they bought it for. Rinse, repeat, you have a project that is just a mess and never gets released. So stay on course and be very careful about taking new money and consider what influences it might have on your project. This is actually one more slide about knowing what's going on. It is really the second biggest problem that we see. There's just nothing that hurts more than to see somebody surprised with a client, right? And it's the kind of thing that requires giant new budget changes or really uncomfortable phone calls, or sometimes, and this happens a lot, your developer eating a lot of expenses. So have a really good sense of where things are standing in the development process, right? As you've submitted tickets, know what their status is, watch the project management tool. If you're not getting enough feedback about where things are, ask for it. Ask for help anytime you run into an issue, right? Don't surprise your developer months later, like, oh yeah, we've known about this problem for a couple months, we just haven't mentioned it, right? Like, and this happens a lot. People, like, oh yeah, this thing's been annoying me, right? If something is annoying you about the thing that you're paying to have built, talk about it immediately, right? Don't let it grind on you. Now, finally, as Steve Jobs would say, I've got one more thing, and that's that you have to let your developer know what's going on too. So speak up when you have concerns, right? If there's issues, like I just said, tell your partner immediately. Let them know if your circumstances change. So say external markets for your product change and you think maybe you're not going to build it, right? Or new board members have come on and they're going to require changes. Let people know about that. If you are going to run out of money, let your developer know as soon as possible. Usually, your developer can find some way to wind the project down to a nice, safe spot, or even just significantly reduce development so things keep going. If you miss payment on an invoice, on the other hand, your developer is not going to be on board with helping, right? Because this is how developers pay their employees. And finally, if you have an important date, conference, demo, whatever you have, let your developer know as far in advance as possible. I have had clients go to trade shows with demos that could have been polished in a couple of days and it said crash on a CES floor, right? Don't let that happen to you. I know this was an information dump. If you want the slides, feel free to let me know. You can email me, I'll have my contact information up here soon. I really, really appreciate your patience and attention. So before I take questions, I do want to iterate just a few key things. So first of all, ask lots of questions because you have to know what's going on. Second, be honest with your developers. Come on, here we go. Because they have to know what's going on. And finally, stay on target. Don't let your scope creep. Don't chase money into the detriment of your project. Do come to my curbside consulting hours. I have a few slots left today, and unfortunately I'm going to be on the road tonight. Or contact me in one of these ways. If you need help in two-way where I can help, I would love to talk about how. I don't know why the link color changed. If you hear, no, it's Adrian, A-D-R-I-A-N. Yeah, right, A-D-R-I-A-N at twowave.com, 2WAV.com. And we're also at 2wave on Twitter, if you want to reach us that way. It is 12:06. I think we go until 12:10, so we have time for some questions if anyone has them.